start off easy. We'll do this all at once. So what's your name, your degree, the year that you're in your degree, campaign colour, and your brand?
Yeah, so my name is Angus Dermody. I am studying Arts and Advanced Studies, doing my honours currently in my 6th year at the university, but I changed degrees. I am running with Sanction Israel now, and our colours are brown and white.
Okay, so how are you feeling going into this campaign so far?
Good. I mean, I think it's a very, very important moment in terms of where we're at politically, both on the campus and more broadly. So I think in terms of what's happening on campus, we've had a massive Palestine movement for, coming up on 2 years now. There was the encampment, there's been multiple student general meetings, protests quite regularly. And we've seen some shifts in terms of, the massive Harbour Bridge March, 300,000 people. There's been shifts at the highest level of politics, and there's been some changes here on campus. So at the start of this year, we were able to force them to cut ties with Bezalel, an Israeli art academy. It was the first Australian university to cut a single tie with an Israeli university. At this point now, there's 4 universities that have cut ties. So yeah, it's at this moment where the tide is turning in favor of Palestine. The movement can start to strike real blows against our government's complicity in genocide. And at the same time, there is this right-wing offensive against the Palestine protests. So in terms of on campus, we've had the campus access policy, the Hodgkinson review. They've completely banned lecture announcements before the start of class. You can't set up a trestle table last semester without getting shut down in 5 minutes or sent disciplinary notices. If you continued, Palestine flags are being removed on campus under one of the policies introduced through the Hodgkinson review. Dr. David Brophy, an academic, had his flag removed on the first day of semester just after the Harbour Bridge March. But yeah, there is still this question of resistance of how far the movement can go. So it's been very good to see more Palestine flags go up on campus. We're in a moment, I think, where we can win, but where the task is very, very serious for us. So yeah, I'm looking forward to using the SRC elections to take that movement further.
Yeah, so you've kind of already touched on it, but what motivated you specifically to run for president?
Yeah, so I think obviously there's just the general moment that we're in, but there's also, I think, a question of what leadership role the SRC can play in this moment. So yeah, there's been times where the SRC has played a very positive role in the movement in terms of being able to defend the right to protest in some ways, being quite openly pro-Palestine, I think has been good, but there's more leadership that could be given at this moment. There's been moments over the past year now where the SRC has faced the wrong way, when the universities tried to go on a crackdown. So when we wanted to do a student general meeting last semester, we were told by members of the SRC and by the president of the SRC, that it wouldn't be a good idea to do this, that we shouldn't do it, that the anti-Semitism definition, which 200 students did end up voting against when it went ahead, that would be too controversial and that, people there would face disciplinary action. But not a single student faced disciplinary action. It was the right thing to do that SGM, and the movement, has only grown as a result of this kind of action. And I think as the university continues to try to repress us, we need an SRC that's on the front foot, that provides active political leadership to the movement.
Great. And name, it doesn't have to be 3, but your 3 most important policy commitments.
Yeah, I mean, we're not really running with policy commitments as such. There's no one-line things that we can throw out to be we're for, this or that. For me, I think the first thing has to be that the fight for Palestine is a priority for all student activists on campus. So in terms of building a serious fight to cut the ties between Sydney University and Israel, that has to be our priority. And we can win, as we know, from cutting ties with Bezalel, but there needs to be more done to make those, ties, the exchange programs. We still have a target, and to actually build the sort of fight that can cut them. So the first thing is that the Palestine movement is a priority. I think the second point there is that more students need to be involved in that fight, and the SRC has to play that role of getting students involved. So it can't just be the case, when 300,000 people march on the bridge, that the movement doesn't grow on campus. The movement has to grow. And if it's going to grow in this period of repression, it'll have to be more students getting involved, cutting the ties with Israel, and importantly, breaking the anti-protest policies to do that. So I think the SRC needs to play much more of a mobilizing role of making ordinary students see themselves as activists. And that's the sort of SRC that I want to run for. And then I think the third thing, which I mentioned, is breaking the anti-protest policies. So I think the SRC can't take any backward step in a moment like this. We need to be going on the offensive against our university management. They're complicit in the worst crimes of a generation, and they want to tell you that you can't speak about that you can't campaign against that. I think the SRC needs to mobilize students in, mass defiance of these rules.
Great. Okay, well, we'll move on to politics now. So are you a member of a political party or political organisation?
Yeah, I'm a member of Solidarity, which is a revolutionary socialist organisation. We're active at the University of Sydney, at other universities, in our workplaces, in the movements, the movement for Palestine. Just yesterday, we helped to organise a counter demo against the racists, the March for Australia. And then I'm also on campus a member of Students Against War. We're a pro-Palestine activist group that was set up originally to challenge the rollout of the AUKUS nuclear submarines on campus, the weapons ties, and then after October 7th, have thrown ourselves into building the fight to cut the ties with Israel first and foremost, and alongside that, the weapons companies.
Yeah, and more generally, how would you describe your own politics briefly?
Yeah, I'm a socialist. I think that you need a revolution to overthrow the capitalist system. You do need, to get rid of this system which breeds war, inequality, racism, oppression. But you also need to build the movements right now. So we need to be active in every struggle for a better world, wherever people are fighting, whether that's workers going on strike here at this university or anywhere else, standing with the unions, standing with anyone who's fighting for Palestine, building the sort of struggle that can cut, the ties to Israel, both at this university and off campus, and our government's support for Israel. So yeah, for me, I'm a revolutionary socialist. We need a revolution, but that starts by building the movements here and now.
Great. And can you define left-wing? Because there are other organisations of the SRC that also define themselves as left-wing, and almost every single president that we've had have defined themselves as such. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's a testament to the student movement that almost everyone who wants to run would call themselves left-wing. Obviously, there's a lot who still don't, but, for instance, like the Labour students, Grassroots, Socialist Alternative, Solidarity, all do run in the SRC elections. And I think that's a strength of these elections. But I also think left-wing isn't just, we support vague progressive stuff. Like for me, what the SRC president has to do is to be a leader in that struggle. And so being left-wing means, fighting management over the ties to Israel. It means actively building the fight, getting more students involved in that fight. Like if you want to be on the left, that means you have to be building the left and not just talking about it.
Yeah, okay. All right, we'll move on to the SRC stuff. So what would you define as the primary roles of the SRC?
Yeah, I think for me, the SRC is the political leadership of the student movement on campus, or at least could be. I don't think it always is, but, it matters whether or not the SRC supports a particular struggle. It matters that the SRC at the university is pro-Palestine, can take the fight to management. I think the role of the SRC has to be, as I said, mobilizing, students who don't see themselves as activists to become activists, to fight for their own interests. So, yeah, the SRC to me is not just about, there's a lot of debate about service provision versus activism. I think fundamentally the SRC has to be a fighting organization and it has to take the fight to management.
And do you think it hasn't taken the fight well enough?
Yeah, that's why I'm running. I think that there are times, where the SRC has been willing to negotiate with management to just simply present policies to management for approval. And I don't think that is a winning strategy. And we've seen that that's not a winning strategy. So for instance, during the Palestine encampment, the height of the Palestine movement on campus, unfortunately, the struggle was wound down into negotiations with management. That wasn't just the SRC, but I think, what was the result of that? We got, this year, a year after the encampment, a divestment review, which made no mention of cutting ties with the arms companies who are complicit in the genocide in Gaza. To me, the SRC can't just accept, things the way they are. We do have to fight against university management very hard. And again, the example given of the student general meeting where, the SRC was eventually one to support it, but there was much talk from within the left of the SRC about not doing the SGM, about it being too controversial. There's been talk in collective meetings about how the Palestine movement needs to be more moderate. It needs to limit itself. It needs to just do what is possible. But I think what is possible is set by the movement itself. I think the 300,000 on the bridge showed that the movement on campus could be doing more than it is right now. And I think more students need to be involved in that. And the SRC has at times failed to reach out to them and get them involved in the fight.
Yeah, okay. So in reference to pushing for the Palestine campaign and cutting ties, the SRC president sits on several committees. So how will you approach engaging with these committees and management in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach to negotiating with management is a dead end strategy. So, like, these people preside over an organization which has a massive surplus, overseas, attacks on the rights of workers here, attacks on the rights of students. They're complicit in the genocide in Gaza. Like, they have nothing to say about the fact that tens of thousands of Palestinians are dead. They refuse, unless forced, to cut a single tie to Israel. There's no negotiating with these people. Like, Mark Scott is the enemy of students on campus. And I think in terms of going to those meetings or whatever, I would go as president, I think, but it'd be to go to report back to the students about what's going on. And I think there have been times when it's been useful for the SRC president to do that. But yeah, we don't go there with any illusions about, the people in those meetings being a positive force at all. Like, they are complicit in genocide and their complicity needs to be broken. Any bit of information that the student movement can use to help break that, we'll take, but we're not going in there, I think, with any illusions that that's the place where the change happens. The change has to happen on the streets, on the campus, in the classrooms, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And on the flip side, what would you say has been a successful campaign that the SRC has run over the past few years?
I mean, I think the Palestine campaign, not that it's been run by the SRC, but we have seen the SRC at its best. So it has been good for the SRC president to be publicly pro-Palestine, to be willing to, face up, to the movement, to speak at the rallies, that sort of stuff. I think that's a positive example of what the SRC has done, is to lend its, weight to the movement. So, for instance, last year, I was suspended during the encampment for making lecture announcements in classes. It was very important, actually, for my case, that the SRC was willing to lend its support. And, we were able to fight off the disciplinary threat there. And that's been the case for, a number of students in a number of campaigns where they have been disciplined. The SRC stands with them and they can win. But yeah, I think there hasn't been enough of the SRC of getting more students involved in that. I think, the SRC needs to play a more leading role in the Palestine movement and not tail it.
Yeah. Okay. So your policy statement, of course, speaks of making the SRC's focus on fighting uni management and backing the Palestine campaign. So we've got two questions. What would this look like materially to you? And as much as people loathe it, there is a limited SRC budget. So how would you manage that and what decisions would you make?
Yeah, I think firstly on what it looks like the SRC can support movements more than it does in terms of, I don't think it's necessarily a question of budget all the time. Like, the SRC should have stalls out on Eastern Avenue every week telling more students that they can be involved in the fight for Palestine. That wouldn't take as much budget as doing a sausage sizzle, for instance, but it would have a material effect on the campaign if the SRC was out there with an SRC trestle table breaking the campus access policy and talking to more students about how they can be involved in the fight for Palestine. I think that's just one example of the sort of thing that the SRC could do, but it's not always a material question. You don't need a big budget to stand up as SRC president and say that I back, the right of Palestinians to resist Israel's oppression. I deny the smears against our movement that we're anti-Semitic. I think that sort of political leadership is needed in a moment like this, and it doesn't cost anything.
Okay. So your policy focus has been largely on Palestine, which is, of course, very important and central to the SRC's campaigns. However, there are students who would still expect a president to remain vocal about other issues like tenancy rights, cost of living crisis, cuts. So how would you reconcile this?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, I have been involved in a number of other fights. The fight for Palestine is a priority right now, but, previously I was very involved in the Environment Collective when we were building the climate strikes. I was very active during the staff strikes and shutting down classes that were going against the picket line and standing on the picket line with staff and getting more students to support it. We had a disciplinary case there for running Zoom pickets, which shut down, classes that were breaking the strike. So yeah, on the question of activism for other causes, I'm completely for it. And I think the second point is that the fight for Palestine is related to all these things. So in terms of just directly, the fight for Palestine that we need on campus has to be bigger. It has to be able to force the university management to cut ties. It needs to be a mass movement. It needs much more students involved in it. It means, classes walking out. It means standing alongside staff to fight for Palestine. A movement which can win that can very easily take that momentum and start to win other things on the campus. Like the fight for Palestine being stronger is a win for all students. It's a win against university management. But it's also related in other ways. So for instance, with the question of, the weapons company partnerships that we're opposing over Palestine, you take, companies like Thales, like Safran, like Lockheed Martin. The reason that the university refuses to cut these weapons partnerships, which are disgusting in terms of complicity and genocide, is because the university wants to play a role in the drive to war on China. It wants the AUKUS funding. We say that no students have an interest in that. War on China is not in any of our interests. More weapons partnerships, will come at the cost of cuts to degrees in things like arts that we're seeing at other universities right now. So if we can cut these ties over Palestine, that's a win for every student who wants to see a university that's free of weapons partnerships, it's free of imperialism, free of militarism. We should close the US Studies Center. This is a disgusting organization which just promotes US imperialism on our campus. They put out a paper last year talking about the Higher Education Summit, and it said that Indigenous rights, things like Indigenous people stopping a nuclear waste dump going on their land, is an example of NIMBYism. This idea that Indigenous people, their rights are not aligned with the interests of our universities and the warmongers. As students, we have no interest in that. That's completely rubbish, racist politics, and we have to resist it. I think similarly, things like the question of anti-Semitism, the right to protest, the way that we've been cracked down on. It meant that when anti-abortion thugs came onto campus this year, the students who wanted to protest against them were threatened with the campus access policy, threatened to have the police called on them. So I think the right to protest, the right to stand up for Palestine is an essential right on this campus, and it's something that raises all these other questions. So yeah, I'm for a stronger fight for Palestine because I'm for a stronger fight against university management. I'm for a stronger fight for students.
And you'll make that clear in your campaign, right?
Yeah. There's no question about, fighting over other issues. It's not just, about Palestine, but at the same time, it is all about Palestine because Palestine is the leading wedge that we have against our university management. If you can mobilize students over Palestine, mobilize them over Palestine, that is the priority. But that doesn't mean that we forget about our universities, horrific cuts, that are happening at ANU, at UTS, at Macquarie or whatever. And I think where the Palestine movement is strongest, you'll see that they have the strongest fight against those cuts. So yeah, it is a pro-Palestine campaign, 100%, no question about that. There's no ambiguity there, but it's also a campaign for students' interests fundamentally.
Great. And what relationships have you cultivated in your time at university or in activism in general that you can bring into your role as president?
Yeah, good question. So, I've been an activist on campus for 6 years now, and I don't think it is a question of personal relationships, but about the sort of movement that, we build and that I've been able to help to build in that time. So I think the best example of a positive relationship between students and other groups would be the relationship between students and staff during the staff strikes, when we stood with them on the picket line, when we did things that they weren't able to do in terms of shutting down, scabbing classes. And in turn, staff defended us too, and we got a disciplinary threat over breaking those striking classes. It was the staff union that passed a motion, and the next day the university dropped that threat. I think that's one example of what that sort of relationship can mean. And obviously there's the question of Palestine as well, like staff flying the flags for Palestine need to be supported by students. It was great that when they took down David's flag, the next day or a few days after, 50 students rallied on very short notice. First rally of the semester in defense of staff's right to do that. And there are more flags flying now. I think in terms of other relationships, it's about building the movement off campus and bringing those politics back onto campus. So for instance, members of Solidarity and Students Against War, we were very involved in the pickets down at Port Botany, the blockade against Zim shipping, the politics that we're building down there in terms of, we need to cut all ties with Israel. We need direct action to stop, the support for Israel. Those politics can come back on a campus and they can mean something for the movement here if the movement has, takes this on. So yeah, I think in terms of direct relationships, you could point to the relationships between, student campaigns and staff campaigns, or, the relationships that I, as a member of Solidarity, have with other groups in the movement, whether it's the fight for Palestine or any other fight, but it's fundamentally about what sort of movement do we build and who do we bring into it.
And the presidency is a tremendous commitment. So how will you manage your time, such as deferring or reducing your study load?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. If elected, I was part-time for most of the time that I was studying at this university because it allowed me to do more activism, but I also don't think that the political leadership that we need is just about time spent doing things. Like, I'm happy to commit time to it, but I think every student, no matter how busy they are, can do one or two things for Palestine. So they can announce in their classes, for Palestine. They can help build the next rally for Palestine, that sort of stuff. I think if the president just gives the call and tells people to do that and helps them to do that, that'd be not massive time commitment there, but a massive contribution to the movement on campus. So yeah, happy to take time to do SRC things, but I also think that this idea of the SRC president commits this massive act of self-sacrifice is overplayed some years. I think it's an important role, but the political leadership is not as big of an ask as people like to make it out to be.
Really?
Yeah, again, I'm happy to take time off to do it, whatever. But I think fundamentally we just need an SRC president who can give leadership to the campaign. And I don't think that is a massive time effort. I'd be very happy to become SRC president to use that time to help the campaign.
And how have you collaborated with other factions, and how would you collaborate with them on council, especially given the enlarged size of council next year?
Sure. So, there's a long history of student groups on campus having to work together. It hasn't always been positive, obviously, but I think fundamentally we do have a shared interest against university management, and the more of us involved in that, the better. I don't think it's necessarily going to council and negotiating between factions about who you can get to vote for your motion. Like, that is student politics at its worst, to be honest. I think at its best, it means that every group on campus is united in the same goal and is bringing more students into that. So yeah, in terms of working with factions, I think it's not just scheming behind closed doors, but it's about putting the case for the sort of movement that we need and working out what people can do to contribute to that. And I've been very, happy to see at times in the Palestine movement that every group on campus has been united. I think the best example still was the unauthorized stalls day that we did right after the campus access policy was introduced. Last year, you had very, very vast representation of different groups, and it's made a difference to the campaign for the campus access policy that was how the opposition to it was initiated. So yeah, I think it's a positive thing, but I don't think it'll be done by factional deals or alliances. I think it'll be done by a united political vision and by dragging dragging when you need to, but by mobilizing other people behind it.
Yep. And you would have collaborated at the encampment as well, right?
Yeah, the staff strikes, etc., etc. Like, the movements can't just be one group.
For sure. Okay. And how will you be working with the various collectives, given the active role they play in drawing in people from outside the SRC?
Yeah, I think the work of the collectives needs to be supported. So, for instance, I was very involved in the Enviro Collective for a number of years during the staff strike campaign. Like, the resources of the SRC meant that we could pull more students into action for the climate, into walking out of their classes, going on strike for the climate. I think we just need to see more of that, to be honest. Like, I think the collectives can play a very, very important role in mobilizing students, and they need to be supported to do that. I think it's, the same question, the same answer to a lot of these questions is that we need a stronger Palestine movement, and that all the groups who consider themselves left-wing activists on campus need to be building that and need to be supported to make a contribution to that.
Right, and we've touched on this topic a bit, but policies such as the CAP and the 5 new speech policies have undoubtedly made organising around campus much harder for the SRC. So what would your approach as president be in organising in the face of this new regime? Yeah,
so I think we need mass defiance. Like, the SRC cannot accept these restrictions. I think to start with the question of Palestine, like, we cannot accept that the university management who are complicit in genocide set the terms for our opposition to it. So the SRC cannot comply, with things like the campus access policy, with the bans on lecture announcements, but also, like, we need to, I think, fight for our own politics and for our right to do it. So at times, management has gone much more actively on the offensive against that. So to give some examples, right after October 7, the group that I'm a part of, Solidarity, hosted a meeting on campus titled The Case for a Global Intifada, talking about, the horrific situation in Palestine, why that means that we need resistance around the world to these horrors. University management banned that meeting. They sent security to the room that we wanted to do it in, and they said that anyone who did this on campus would be disciplined. The SRC should have come out much stronger in defense of using the term intifada. I think, there have been other examples, to go back to the Student General Meeting for Palestine that happened last semester. The SRC should have been much stronger about mobilizing students to oppose this new anti-Semitism definition. The thing is rotten, like it's a denial of the right of Palestinians to self-determination. The SRC has to oppose that completely. The SRC should have been much more active in defending the two motions that were voted for at the Student General Meeting last year about the right of Palestinians to resist Israel's oppression, about our support for a demand for a single democratic, secular state in historic Palestine with equal rights for all. When university management decided that they wanted to smear that Student General Meeting after it happened, the SRC's statement in response to management made no mention of the fact that students had decided to vote in massive historic numbers for the right of Palestinians to resist and for a single Palestinian state. And I think that was a shame because it gives university management essentially a free kick, a leg up, if the SRC isn't even willing to defend what 600 plus students have just voted on. So yeah, I think in terms of defending our right to free speech, like the SRC needs to take every opportunity to set the terms to fight for our politics and to defend them if university management goes on the offensive. But I think the other issue is that these policies are an attack on all student activism. Right now, they're going after the Palestine movement. But when staff have their next round of bargaining, what is going to happen to the picket lines? If the left decides to accept things like the campus access policy, the ban on demonstrations without notice, the ban on protests indoors, that sort of stuff, I think we need to build mass defiance over the question of Palestine to defend the right to protest for all these other issues on campus. And yeah, as president, I would be for building for mass defiance of every single one of these rotten policies, flying the Palestinian flag everywhere on campus, organizing more students to do announcements in their classes, no notice for demonstrations, no notice for stalls, these sorts of things. And I think there's precedent that is possible. Not a single student was disciplined for the Student General Meeting, which voted to oppose the anti-Semitism definition. And we've been massively vindicated by that when 50 panelists pulled out of the Bendigo Writers Festival over the same definition, completely wrecked it over this definition. We're on their side. We're with the hundreds of students who voted to oppose it at the University of Sydney. I think we need to see more of this politics of being unapologetic, uncompromising in our support for Palestine.
Okay, great. And what is your relationship with the NTEU, and what will your approach be during enterprise bargaining next year?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of a personal relationship, like I know a lot of NTU members. I've been very happy to work with them, in campaigns in the past. But I think more broadly, the question should be, what is the relationship between the student movement and the staff movement? And I think the last round of staff strikes, which, myself, other members of Solidarity were a part of, was very, very pleasing or encouraging in that respect to show that it is possible for students to support staff actively. So it wasn't just a question of going to the picket lines that staff organized, but it was doing the things that staff themselves couldn't, like going to classes that were breaking the picket lines, telling them, that you're breaking the strike here, that this is not in your interest, and getting them to walk out of their classes and shut down those classes, doing the same on Zoom. I think that sort of dynamic where the students and staff can encourage each other, can build a shared fight, but can take their own initiative is important. I think it's similar in the Palestine campaign. Like, we were very happy to work alongside staff for a National Day of Action earlier this year in March. It was a massive success. It was one of the biggest Palestine initiatives on campus since the Student General Meeting the semester before that. We'll keep building the student movement. They'll keep building the staff movement over the question of Palestine. Both of us need to get stronger in terms of the student movement and staff movement. Going into enterprise bargaining, need to be in the strongest possible position, doing whatever we can as students to support staff in every initiative that they take, I think is essential.
Great. And how would you endeavour to make the SRC more visible?
Yeah, I think it's the SRC, has done sausage sizzles on Eastern Avenue. has handed out tote bags, these sorts of things. And in a way, it has made the SRC more visible, but I don't think it's been on the political basis that we need. So for me, I'm for SRC stalls on Eastern Avenue, talking about the Palestine movement every week, not just in O Week. I'm for the SRC being a leading force in all of these fights. Like the SRC, would be visible to students in the Palestine movement if the SRC was out there, leading the protests, leading the stalls, leading the initiatives, taking, the movement forward. I think it's not like we can't just, water down the politics of the SRC or, not criticize management, not be too activist for fear of scaring off students. The fact is that the majority of students support Palestine. The majority of students oppose our university's complicity in genocide. The majority of students want something to do about it, and the SRC can be that force. And I think the question of visibility and being a leading force in the campaigns is one and the same.
Great. All right, we're up to our last 3 questions. So are you at liberty to disclose any tickets or factions that you are currently working with?
It's not for us, I think, a question of working with tickets necessarily or making backroom deals for preferences. Like, I think the basis on which, preferences are done, on which tickets offer support to each other has to be on the strongest possible political basis. So, yeah, we're not in any sort of backroom conversations about the SRC elections. We're putting forward our case. If people want to support it, that's excellent. If people are doing, campaigns that we support, then we'll support them in the elections. I think, yeah, it's about making the fight for Palestine, the fight for students' rights strongest. And I think backroom deals, signing away of positions, these sorts of things do not help the movement. So as Solidarity, we don't engage in that sort of stuff.
Okay. And we've got a fun one. So if you were a frog, what colour would you be?
I think most frogs are green, so probably green.
And were there any final words that you would like to say?
No, I think the message of our campaign is to, as I said, the majority of students who support Palestine. So if there are students out there who support Palestine, who are listening to this or who are looking at the SRC elections and wondering what to do in the face of these horrors, like the message is just to get involved. I think there's so much to do when we look at, the horrors in Gaza, the complete complicity of our university in this genocide, their continued inaction. Like, the strength of the movement is entirely dependent on how many students are mobilizing for Palestine, how many are announcing in their classes, how many are on the stalls building the next protest. We need more students involved in that, and every student can be a part of that. So, yeah, if there's students out there who aren't already involved, I'd encourage you to check out Students Against War to get involved for the fight for Palestine.
Okay, thank you so much.
No worries.
Great.